Seems like the U.S. is now engaging with our European allies. What are we learning about what Europe would like to see the U.S. do next when it comes to Venezuela?
Yeah, the European reaction was fairly muted. They certainly did not see Maduro as a legitimate leader, and we're very much concerned about the deterioration of democracy. But what you hear consistently is the concern for the violation of sovereignty and the respect for international law. The Europeans also want to make sure, because meanwhile, as we've been watching these extraordinary events happen in Caracas, high-level talks in Kyiv yesterday, continuing to work through the peace deal, a big important meeting in Paris tomorrow that President Macron is hosting to hopefully get more on security guarantees. So they're also trying to manage increased Russian aggression, obviously watching this incredibly bold military action. And then we'll talk about, I'm sure, they're also very worried about a violation of the Kingdom of Denmark. So they're managing all of these things.
I can't wait to hear from you on the Greenland aspect with your history dealing with our European allies. But this was framed yesterday by Marco Rubio, Venezuela, as a crossroads for all of our enemies. And it was, as you and I have discussed over the course of weeks, the evolving justification that we've heard from the White House really resolved into, on Friday and into Saturday, one that included Hamas and Iran, which in fact is true. Iran has facilities in Venezuela to train the Revolutionary Guard. They make drones there. There is a direct connection, but it's not one that we heard about until very late in the game. How come?
I agree with you completely. And this is going to be so interesting to see the ripple effect of, now that Maduro is gone, how do we see Russia, China, which has an enormous, 80 billion, debt extension to Venezuela, Russia, Iran, Cuba, how our adversaries are interacting. And when one of those, adversaries has a significant change, what will happen? But you're absolutely right, Joe. I mean, we really had a variety of descriptions here, from removing a dictator democracy, drugs. Now it seems much more focused on oil. But this is all about hemispheric defense, and that's where the Greenland question also comes into play.
Well, if we actually stick with what you were just saying about China and the Western Hemisphere, China really has made significant inroads in Latin America. I believe it's 24 signatories between Latin America and the Caribbean on its Belt and Road Infrastructure Initiative. What is sort of the broader geopolitical theme that we should be watching for here? Could this actually be a setback to Beijing's inroads that they've already made in the region?
Well, I will say this is certainly a setback for Vladimir Putin in Russia, because he was certainly banking on this. In fact, they just signed an agreement, a strategic partnership between Venezuela and Russia. But you're absolutely right. Look, we're seeing across the board, Brazil, Peru, China has made significant inroads. What does Beijing think about this? Will it lose its credit line? Will there be a grand bargain made? And I think for me, the interesting point on Venezuela, we had Secretary Rubio state very clearly, the blockade will continue, the sanctions continue. But meanwhile, we are seeing that sanctioned tankers are able to leave Venezuela right now, with some of them free passage to China and Russia. So we're extremely confused even what this means for economic interests for China and Russia.
Well, there's some confusion about what the so-called Donroe Doctrine includes as well, because maybe this is not the end. And the president indulged a lot of possibilities on Air Force One last evening as he looked across the region, considering Colombia or Cuba, which may fall on its own, according to the president. We don't necessarily need military intervention there. But let's get to the idea of Greenland. We've been fooling around with this conversation since before the president even took office. Here's what he said last night.
We need Greenland from a national security situation. It's so strategic. Right now, Greenland is covered with Russian and Chinese ships all over the place. We need Greenland from the standpoint of national security. And Denmark is not going to be able to do it, I can tell you.
Okay, Heather, is Greenland next?
Well, certainly the Danish Prime Minister and the Greenlandic Prime Minister believe it's a possibility, as well as our NATO allies.
They do, so they're taking him literally.
Yeah, they are, very much so. And today, the comments by the Danish Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, were very clear. I mean, again, look at the evolution of this. I mean, President Trump has mused about this since 2019, so this carries from the first term. And the Danish and Greenlandic response first started as sort of, ha-ha, not for sale. No, really, it's a territory, and we're a NATO partner, and we're a good partner, and we've been strong allies. Today was stop, enough, And if you do this, you are now ending NATO as we know it, because one NATO country is now going to be attacking another NATO country. Interestingly, you had British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who was, again, on Venezuela going, Maduro was illegitimate, we don't like this. On Greenland, you had the Norwegian Prime Minister, the British Prime Minister saying, no, really, no. This is not. So you see a change of tone here. Again, I think there'll be pressure that the administration is going to continue to bring to bear on Greenland. But Greenland is important for U.S. national security, but we have a base there. We have a strong relationship. The Danish government, the Greenland government will allow us to do more, but it's not about annexing or purchasing the territory.
We actually have, Tyler, the tweet from Denmark's Prime Minister. I have to say this very directly to the United States, to your point, Heather. It makes absolutely no sense to talk about the need for the U.S. to take over Greenland. The U.S. has no right to annex any of the 3 countries in the Commonwealth. Pretty straightforward.
I mean, yeah, and as you're putting into context for us, pretty big, huge news and a pretty big shift, because it was a redhead on the Bloomberg terminal that Denmark says a U.S. attack on Greenland would mean the end of NATO. If we could take perhaps a broader view here, and you hear President Trump talk about how this is important to national security, how are we seeing natural resources play so much into this administration's actions when it comes to foreign policy? Because we have Venezuela and oil reserves, but also when we are talking about Greenland, they're sitting on, I believe, the 3rd largest oil reserves in the Arctic, and there's a huge deposit of critical minerals.
So there's absolutely, but again, this gets back to the Venezuela energy picture right now. We have to be very clear about what's on the ground. We do see, critical minerals mining in Greenland. There is very limited infrastructure. It will take decades plus. There were some exploration offshore Greenland oil and gas. It was not found to be sufficient. And by the way, we have fairly low global energy prices. You were talking about very expensive, decades-long investment. It sounds good in theory. The practical implementation of this is far, far away.
We haven't had a reason to pull out the Greenland beauty shots in a while, as you're seeing on Bloomberg TV. But is the president right about this, that it's covered with Russian and Chinese ships all over the place? That's the quote.
It's not covered. But there is, again, there's importance in, we're seeing an uptick in Russian submarine activity. The famous Greenland-Iceland United Kingdom gap, that Cold War gap, to make sure those Russian submarines from the Arctic do not penetrate and threaten North America. You do have Chinese research vessels that are doing research on the subsea, on the seafloor, which is concerning. But we don't have to threaten annexing Greenland. We need to work with our partners, and the Danes have already put a substantial Arctic security package to increase that security. That's the direction we want them to go. But this is distracting them for continuing to focus on their own strengthening of security. They're doing a lot. We see some problems there, but it doesn't require what the president is saying.
We only have a minute left, but since we have spoken so much about Russia, President Trump was asked about the state of negotiations with Ukraine yesterday on Air Force One. Have you seen anything that has indicated positive momentum in your view, as the president says this could be wrapped up soon, but we haven't really gotten headlines?
So it's not going to be wrapped up soon, but I'm continuing to see really important progress. This meeting tomorrow in Paris, the Europeans will continue to articulate the security guarantees that Ukraine needs before they can move forward in any deal. American commitments have to be an essential part of that. You're seeing the Ukrainians also start to prepare the ground for a referendum, for an election, if there is a peace deal. So I'm seeing the positives on the Ukrainian and a European side. Russia, absolutely nothing. In fact, you see Vladimir Putin wanting to expand this war, not taking any of these signals. So progress on the Ukrainian, European side, nothing on the Russian side right now.